بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وألحقنا بعبادك الصالحين. So we spoke about some important indications as to where one is in that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how one should approach the idea of servitude and true slavery to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here we talk, inshallah, today about the actual relationship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one has to, like we said last time, that the aim is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should be at the center of everyone's life. And that if one has Allah, then he has everything. If he doesn't have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he does not have anything in life. Especially that everything is reliant on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be brought into existence. So how can I be with the creations but not be with the creator, who has the ultimate power and the ultimate knowledge of everything? It doesn't even make any sense to the average person. So in order to allow this relationship to evolve in a deep way, in a way that we are required to develop and to progress and to advance and to elevate in, it's important that one should leave no moment in life without reflection. This is a very, very important thing, because one thing that we learn is that when we're told to do things, and we're told to change, and we're told to be better people, and we're told to worship Allah, and we're told to have in our hearts the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not associate anything or anyone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at the same time we are reflecting in our actions, because all of this we take with us everywhere. If you remember when we spoke about the priority, when we said what should the priority be, we said that the priority is our heart. So if we're taking our heart everywhere, then these contemplations, these pondering, these observing our conduct and observing how we're thinking when we're interacting with things, and making mistakes and saying I made this mistake because I wasn't conscious of Allah, and then repenting and then standing back up again, and this whole idea of a very conscious and very active relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where one is constantly bettering himself and constantly thinking about where he's going wrong and what needs to be corrected, not just corrected in terms of actions, but corrected in terms of characteristics in the person. So then they aim to make this change after making that mistake. Then they go out into life, into society, into everyday interactions in the world, and they become exposed to situations that test that characteristic again, or test the idea that Allah's oneness is in my heart and I'm not reliant on anything but or anyone but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they will not be able to assess where they are unless they're able to be tested, and there is a reality that someone is living in, where they are conducting themselves in a certain way that exposes how they are and brings them back to knowing where they stand, so that they can tweak, or they can develop, or they can seek more knowledge, or they can ask the people of knowledge, etc., in order to refine and um, to refine and to better themselves and better their conduct. So one should let no moment in life be without reflection. They could be at work, they could be at university, they could be, on a bus, they could be walking, they could be anything. Just constantly having this activeness inside us, where we're thinking about where we are, and we're thinking about what our true worship and servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, and how active it is, and um, how committed we are in our everyday actions. So one's relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very much also a pondering relationship, not just a rituals worship relationship in terms of fasting and praying, etc. So what we are doing today, or what we are doing in our everyday life, or what we are going to do, um, and what we have done and what we have achieved, all good, one has to be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But also, if one has done negative, this is very, very important because this accountability is at the core of this relationship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we see verses in the Quran that even when Sayyidina Adam ate from the tree, and it's not a sin because prophets and messengers do not sin, and we will come to this when we talk about the Aqidah, inshallah. But it was he had forgotten, and the verses in the Quran. So there was no perseverance, there was no attempt to commit this wrong or to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it was out of forgetfulness. So even when one does wrong, it's important, number one, that they admit that they are the reason and nothing else. They are the reason and nothing else. And this is, unfortunately, this is something that's not, a lot of people do not have this. And this weakness of accountability and trying to export their problems or their concerns to blame it on anything and everyone else, this is causing a delay and causing a destruction in one's relationship and in one's progress in their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is a very, very important attribute that one is to be blessed with, and one should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for, and one should aim and persevere to be able to have the courage to say that it's my fault and it's only my fault. And I like to give an example of this idea where we just want to export things. And the example I'll give isn't to do with a sin or in that sense, but it's to do with this idea of thinking inwardly, not just thinking outwardly. What do we mean by thinking inwardly? When we come across things around us and when things happen, we tend to be alert and maybe attributing to ourselves when positive things happen. But when negative things happen, we want to brush it off as if it can't be me or it's no way me. So when someone, if we're in a room, for example, and says, who did this wrong thing, for example, before even looking to see what this wrong thing is, some people, they have inside them, oh, it's not me, because they're not willing to have this even acceptance that they are bad or they've done wrong. And this could be for a number of reasons. This could be because they want to shy away from the need to refine themselves, so they do not refine themselves, because refining themselves means that they're going to have to commit and sacrifice, and they're going to have to do a lot of things. Like we said in the beginning of the book, the obstructions and the modernity and the social conditionings and all of these things, a lot of these things they're going to have to give up if they truly want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they want to hide away from this, or they are naturally not responsible people to stand up and say, I need to refine myself. So, but when there's something positive, oh, who did this? The shoulders go up, and the chest widens, and the smile comes on the face, even before anything has even been said. Just this readiness that every good can be attributed to me. Now, this is a problem, and I like to give an example where this isn't a real life story, but just imagine this, and maybe we can even relate to this. Imagine someone walking into a masjid, for example, and they're about to pray a certain prayer, and the imam is reading Qul huwa Allahu ahad in al-Maghrib, for example. In the first rak'ah, in the first unit of the salah, the imam reads al-Fatiha, as we should obviously, and then reads Qul huwa Allahu ahad. And then in the second rak'ah, he reads again Qul huwa Allahu ahad. And then this person comes back for Isha prayer, and then in the first rak'ah, the imam is reading Qul huwa Allahu ahad. And then the second rak'ah, again Qul huwa Allahu ahad. Then he comes back for Fajr, the first rak'ah Qul huwa Allahu ahad, the second rak'ah Qul huwa Allahu ahad. Now, honestly speaking, if we just just be transparent with ourselves, what is likely to be the case, and what are people likely to say? Things like, is this a real imam? Or does this person not know any other verses? Or is there no one else to replace this person? Or does the masjid not have someone that could recite anything beyond Surah Qul huwa Allahu ahad? These are some of the things that we come across. This is what we mean by thinking outwardly. It's thinking about what out there, the flaws out there. It's all out there. The problem is out there. The issue is out there. The flaws are out there. The lack of proper achievement of things is all out there. It's all out there. Throw it out there. But does one maybe ask himself, or before does one ask himself, maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created an opportunity for this person that he would listen and be attentive to certain specific verses that this person needs in order to better themselves. Because there may be a flaw or there may be an issue in this person that he needs to wake up to certain meanings that are in this surah, in Surah Qul Huwa Allahu Ahad or Surah Al-Ikhlas. But while this person is thinking that they're clever and they're thinking outwardly it must be this, or don't they have this, or why aren't they doing this, etc., he thinks he's clever, but he is the most ignorant person because he has been having to be reminded of the same thing, not in one rak'ah, but in 2 rak'ahs, in 3 rak'ahs, in 4 rak'ahs, in 5 and 6 rak'ahs. And even then, he's still thinking outwardly about where the problem could be out there, not the problem is in me. And this is a massive, massive problem. Because if we contemplate a lot of these opportunities or a lot of these things that happen to us, or a lot of this maybe repetitive things that happen to us, and ask ourselves, maybe it's me. Maybe the issue is me. Maybe this is for me. Or maybe Allah knows best if it was intended for me, directly, but at least you're there and something is being, we're being reminded of something. So even if someone doesn't have an issue that this verse is here to support or to help them overcome, but no doubt that these verses will still develop or still better someone even more than they are. So it's important that when these experiences happen, one looks inwardly to say, right, could this have happened because I need it? Or this problem that's happened in my household, is it because I've committed a sin? Or, all of these inwardly thinking. This is also part of the process, or part of the important principles of refining ourselves and purifying ourselves. And we will talk about this, inshallah, when we talk about ihsan or spiritual purification, inshallah, in the relevant section. However, like we said, we have to first of all admit that we are the only ones that are the problem and the reason for doing the negative or committing a sin or falling into wrongdoing. And B, to regret it. The regret has to be a very core thing in our relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Very, very important. And number 3, to insist on not returning to it again. And number 4, if it involves the rights of other people, we must return those rights. And these are, by the way, the conditions of repentance to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this allows the relationship with Allah to be renewed all the time. So we must also spend time with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just you and Allah. Be alone with the alone subhanahu wa ta'ala. That one must be alone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to yearn His forgiveness and seek His acceptance and talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and express our concerns and worries. We need to get into the habit of being able to talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a normal way, but in a way that is respectful, in a way that glorifies Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we need to be able to speak without barriers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very, very close to us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself says, I am near. I respond to those who call me. If we go back to Surah Al Imran, we find that the mother of Maryam, alayhi salam, before she gave birth to Sayyidah Maryam, look at the conversation that she was having with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Oh Allah, I devote to you what is in my womb. I devote it to you, and it's a normal dialogue. It's celebrating. It's as if she's celebrating what she has and celebrating that she's devoting it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even after birth, she continues she continues that dialogue with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or she continues rather that expressing of her feelings and of her maybe happiness or maybe even her yearning in seeking that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes Maryam alayhi salam a blessed lady. So we need to be able to have this conversation without barriers, and we don't need large vocabularies and and complicated words just because we hear it there or we hear it there. When a companion, he came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, I don't know how to say these big words that you say in dua. So the Prophet ﷺ said to him, so what do you say? He said, oh Allah, please give me Jannah and protect me. Please give me paradise and protect me from hellfire. The Prophet ﷺ responded by saying, and we are just, we're scattering around this meaning. So we are, we're revolving around this same meaning, but everyone has their own way of expressing it. We need to bring down this barrier and be able to talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Talk to him, tell him, Allah, I'm worried. Allah, I need your help. And it doesn't always have to be that someone is seeking something. When someone goes to someone and expresses how happy they are because they got a promotion or they graduated or whatever it is, there's nothing they're seeking there. Yeah, but they're not asking for something. But it's about expressing your happiness to the one that you love. And like we said last time when we spoke about the indications of where we are in this relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we spoke about the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And remembrance is being able to be also conscious of, or being able to, actually talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and having that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not just the remembrance in terms of Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, or Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, or La ilaha illallah. It's also remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as being the core in your life, being the ultimate one that you love. This is very, very important in our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if we do this along with other means of purification and practicing our religion completely, all three elements, Islam, Iman, Ihsan, one will see that their life will transform. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will embrace you with his generosity. This humility to want to sit down with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will lead to honor. And any darkness that we have inside us, it will lead inshallah to light. And the veils that are the barrier, or the veils that hinder being better people and being noble people and being righteous people, it will be reduced. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's light is never extinguished. But we're the ones that are creating these veils. And we are the ones that are allowing these veils to thicken. So the more effort that we put in, the more these veils are removed and replaced with guidance, just as reflection is a very important sign as well of an awakened heart. Remember, if we want to refine ourselves and be better people and refine our heart, how can you change something that hasn't even awoken? How can we change something that is fast asleep? So it's important as well, through these reflections, that we are allowing the heart to be awakened. Now, another important thing is, because we're talking about the sacred journey, so it's very important, just so that we're realistic and we're honest with each other as well, that we talk about both things. We talk about what we need to do, but we talk about the reality of what we may experience in this journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to better ourselves and to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala correctly and fully. What we're trying to say here is that there is no one that will not fall into mistakes, because we're not infallible. But falling into a mistake is different to insisting on a mistake or being heedless in our ways. So even then, if we fall into mistakes, the door of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always remain open. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, he says, indeed it is we, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who created mankind and fully know what their souls whisper to them, and we are closer to them than their vein, or than their heart vein. And this is what we were saying earlier about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very close to the person, so we should not create any barriers. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he created us and he knows that we will fall into sin, but we have to be conscious that we are falling into sins and not creating sins, or not intentionally wanting to sin Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware of our nature. We're not infallible and we will not be without mistakes. However, it's about putting effort and persevering into not wanting to commit or wanting to wanting to sacrifice everything, like we said as one of the indications last time, to sacrifice for the one that we love. Now, look at these verses that we'll now just ponder on, inshallah, because it relates very much to what we're saying in terms of how we can progress in that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, those who strive hard for our cause, we will surely guide them to our way. Now, there are key words here. There's two parts to this verse. The first is our part, our duty, and the second is the outcome from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or the gift, the blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because we put that effort in and we've done our part. So in the first part that says, those who strive hard for our cause, meaning those who strive to persevere to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to deal with their egoistic self and to overcome sins and to prevent themselves from falling into wrongdoing. Those who do that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will surely guide them to our way. The outcome will be that one will be rightly guided and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help them be disciplined and they will be in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that just shows that the more we persevere and more we put effort in, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us guidance. But look at the mercy of Allah and look at the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't just stop there. Even then, not only will we be guided, but we will also increase in guidance. Because in another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and those who are guided, He increases them in guidance and blesses them with righteousness. So they are guided in their heart, in their mind, in their body, in their actions. Can you see the three elements coming back again? The three elements coming back again. So we become guided in our hearts, in our minds, in our actions, in our conduct, serving both the inner and outer condition. This is all from what? This is all from those who strive, or those who persevere hard for our cause. So when one puts this effort into finding it hard to refrain from a sin or refrain from desires or whatever it is, but that element of perseverance, that in itself is worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is what will bring back excuse me that's what will bring back guidance upon a person. And not only will they have guidance, but they will increase in guidance. So can you see how this also ties into the sacred journey that we're talking about? It's a journey that we want to progress in. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is allowing us to come onto this journey of righteousness and being noble people, etc., through our striving, because He's given us guidance, but also He's progressing us on that journey. He's elevating us in the ranks of righteousness because of that effort that we're putting in. So it's important that we ponder on this. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He takes our hand, for we have no effort and no strength and no ability except with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.